Good morning. We're going to continue today our study of the book of Revelation. And today we're up to Revelation, the 6th chapter. We're particularly going to look at the first 8 verses, Revelation 6, 1 through 8. And these are powerful verses. They're the account of the 4 horsemen. In these verses, 4 horsemen are summoned from heaven, and they're released on the earth, and they wreak just absolute havoc and devastation on the earth. I mean, it's powerful, it's picturesque, it's horrifying image. And we have to take a look at that and just ask what's going on. So today we're going to look at all that. Before we do, let me do a summary of where we've been. Let me get us up to speed on where we are in Revelation, and then we'll continue on with this account of the horsemen. So, by way of review, chapter 1 of Revelation begins with a vision of Jesus. Very significant. Chapter 1, John the author is given a vision of Jesus, a vision of the risen Christ. And it is absolutely dynamic. Christ is portrayed in his power and glory and wonder. John uses all sorts of Old Testament imagery, and he gives us this sense, this picture of the power and the wonder and the awesomeness of the risen Christ. And I think that's significant. Revelation begins in Jesus. Revelation is a book about Jesus. The focus of the book is Jesus Christ. Now, that should be obvious, but we tend to lose sight of that in our modern day. Very often in our modern day, we read Revelation looking for a roadmap to the future. And we get the idea that Revelation teaches that at the end of the world, there's going to be this nuclear cataclysm. And the book of Revelation gives us a roadmap of how to get there. But the problem with that is that's not John's focus. John's focus is on Jesus Christ. In fact, John goes so far to tell us that Jesus is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. When we talk about the end, we're talking about Jesus. And so in the first chapter, John very intentionally focuses us on our Lord, and he's going to return to that focus again and again and again. This is a book about Jesus Christ. Well, that's chapter 1. Chapters 2 and 3 in Revelation are referred to as the messages to the 7 churches. Revelation is a letter, and it was specifically addressed to 7 congregations in ancient Asia Minor, the ancient Roman province of Asia, now modern-day Turkey. There were 7 congregations. John knew them very well. And so John writes specific messages to each of these congregations. He commends them for their strengths. He corrects them and challenges them on their weaknesses. He calls them to lives of faithfulness. First message is to the church in Ephesus. 7th message is to the church in Laodicea. 7 messages to 7 churches. Chapters 4 and 5 of Revelation are what I like to call in the throne room. In the throne room. At the beginning of chapter 4, John is given a heavenly vision. And this vision takes the vast majority of the rest of the book. Chapter 4 begins with John getting a vision of heaven. And the first thing he sees is the throne of God. It's magnificent. What John sees is that the center of the cosmos is God's throne. And John describes this throne and describes God in picturesque, imaginative, powerful terms. And he literally stretches our imaginations to the breaking point to give us a sense of the majesty and the wonder and the power of Almighty God. So John gives us this picture of God on his throne, and then he shares how all of creation is gathered around the throne. There are living creatures, and there are angels and archangels, and all of creation gathers around the throne, and they share in praise of God. It's a powerful picture of the centrality of our God and all of creation gathered around him. Well then, as you continue on into chapter 5, God holds in his right hand a scroll, and there are 7 seals on the scroll. And the question is, who is worthy to open the scroll? And we will figure out that this scroll is really God's plan, God's purpose for the completion of human history, for bringing about the redemption of this world. And the question is, who's worthy to open it? Who is worthy to bring about God's plan of redemption? And no one steps further, and John begins to weep because no one can do this. And then the Lamb steps forward. The Lamb, Jesus Christ, steps forward and takes the scroll. And it's a proclamation that who's going to bring about God's redemption? Jesus. And so Jesus takes the scroll, and once again, all of heaven erupts in worship and praise of Jesus. It's just a magnificent picture of the centrality of God and the God revealed in Jesus Christ, and now the Lamb putting this plan of God into fulfillment. So that's where we are. That's how far we've come in Revelation. Today we begin with chapter 6. Now in chapter 6, Jesus takes this scroll and removes the seals. And with each seal that is removed, there's havoc and judgment and desolation wreaked on the earth. When the first 4 seals are removed, when each seal is removed, a horseman is summoned out of heaven. And these horsemen come and wreak just absolute devastation on the earth. Again, powerful, picturesque image. Let's take a look at it. Let me read for you verses 1 through 8 from chapter 6. Verses 1 through 8 from the book of Revelation, chapter 6. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the 7 seals, and I heard one of the 4 living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider was given a bow and a crown, and he came out conquering and to conquer. When he opened the 2nd seal, I heard the 2nd living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth, so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword. When he opened the 3rd seal, I heard the 3rd living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be the voice in the midst of the 4 living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, but do not harm the oil and the wine." When he opened the 4th seal, I heard the voice of the 4th living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a pale horse. Its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over 1/4 of the earth, to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. Wow. Powerful imagery, horrifying imagery. What do we do with all this? Well, let's look a little more specifically at each of these horsemen. Verses 1 and 2, the first seal. The first seal is opened, and a living creature calls out, "Come." And a rider comes out mounted on a white horse. He has a bow and a crown, and he comes out conquering and to conquer. Now this imagery of horsemen, and horsemen on different colored horses, is drawn from the book of Zechariah in the Old Testament, although John drastically reworks the imagery. And again, that's very typical of John. John takes much of his imagery in Revelation from the Old Testament, but he takes great freedom in reworking the imagery into proclaiming different things. Well, a mounted archer would have presented the people of the Roman Empire, the people to whom John has addressed this letter, with a military threat. It would have been a message of threat and worry. The Romans at the time had no mounted archers. They didn't have such a thing in their legions, but some of their enemies did. Some of the surrounding empires and kingdoms had developed mounted archers, and they were of great concern to the Romans. In particular was the Parthian Empire. The next empire to the east from the Roman Empire were the Parthians. The boundary between them was the Euphrates River, and so this area where these churches in Asia Minor is close to that. And we know from history that the Parthians developed a strong means of attacking with mounted archers. they put bowmen on horses and figured out techniques for shooting and then charging and reshooting, and the Romans couldn't figure out how to stop them. They were a threat to Rome. In fact, twice in the previous century, the Romans had done battle with the Parthians and lost. And so the Romans in this area lived with a fear of an invasion by the Parthians. And so when John writes about a mounted horseman with bows and coming to conquer, it's going to evoke this sense of fear and dread of a military attack. That's the first horseman. Second horseman, the second seal, verses 3 and 4. The second seal is now opened, and a horseman comes out on a bright red horse. And he's given a great sword. And this horseman takes peace from the earth, so that people will slaughter each other. It's violence. His peace is now taken away. Third seal. Third seal is opened, and a horseman comes out on a black horse. And he comes out carrying a set of scales. Remember, scales in olden times were used to weigh things out. This horseman comes out, and he's carrying scales. This horseman wreaks economic hardship on the earth. Economic hardship. A voice proclaims a quart of wheat for a day's pay, 3 quarts of barley for a day's pay. Well, think about that for a minute. The economy's gone crazy. If you have to work the entire day for 1 quart of wheat or 3 quarts of barley, that means you're probably going to be able to feed your family, but that's about it. How long could you survive if your entire pay for a day goes to feed your family for that day? We know from ancient records that generally a day's pay, a denarius, would buy at least 16 quarts of wheat. And so this is an indication the economy is in havoc. It's just gone absolutely crazy. By the way, note the line, do not harm the olive oil and the wine. Some scholars have suggested that indicates that the poor suffer. They can't afford their daily bread, while the rich do fine. They get luxury items of olive oil and wine. I don't think that's quite accurate. It seems that olive oil and wine were also staples of life. More likely what's being said is that all your money is being used to buy bread. There's nothing left over for the other necessities of life. The economy's in chaos. And then the fourth seal. Fourth seal is broken, and a fourth horseman comes out, and he rides a horse of a sickly, ghastly green color. It's just a horrifying image. And this horseman is identified as death. And death and Hades are given authority to kill 1/4 of the earth's population. Well, wow. What do you do with this? Horrifying, frightening image. What do you do? Let's take a look and see if we can figure out what John's doing with these images. And what I want to do is borrow some ideas from Dr. Craig Kester of Luther Seminary in St. Paul, Minnesota. Dr. Kester suggests that what John is doing is trying to shake the sense of security that Christians get. One of the temptations for Christians in the world is to think that we can build a life without God. We can find our security in the things of this earth, and we really don't need God. And John is intentionally trying to shake that. In fact, Dr. Kester goes a little bit further and says, imagine how this message would sound in first century Laodicea. Remember Laodicea? That was the 7th church to which John addressed his messages. And Laodicea was the rich church. They're the prosperous ones. We know from the letter that Laodicea is a rich, prosperous community, very proud of its banking and its textile and its medical schools. We assume that the congregation shares in that wealth. They're rich, they're prosperous, they think they're self-sufficient, which, by the way, is the reason Jesus says he's going to spit them out of his mouth. They're lukewarm in faith. They're not at all serious about basing their life in God. Jesus says, if you don't repent, I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. But they're rich. We can imagine they're content. They look to the Roman Empire to protect them. They have all the security they need. And what John is doing with these 4 horsemen is asking the question, wait a minute, are you really as safe are you really as secure as you'd like to think? First horseman. John says, remember those Parthians off to the east? What happens if they invade? Rome can't stop them. And they're going to get to Laodicea a lot quicker before they get to Rome. Are your national borders really safe? Second horseman. What about violence in your own community? Are you safe where you live? Are there parts of your town that you wouldn't walk around it late at night? How safe is your own community? Third horseman. What about the economy? Can you really support your family? Are you sure you're going to be able to take care of your family? Are you going to have enough bread? Is your job secure? We know from history that the ancient economy was more up and down than ours. Economic problems were a fact of life. All it took was a good drought to put everything into chaos. Are you really going to be able to provide for and take care of your family? And the fourth horseman. If you can escape all the rest, what about death? What about your own mortality? Do you recognize you're a being unto death? How does that make you feel? Now notice what John is doing. He's pricking the Christian sense of security. You think you can build a life without God? You think you can be secure in and of yourself? Well, how does that really work? Can you really build a secure life without Almighty God? Now with that said, let's jump 2,000 years from 1st century Laodicea to 21st century America. And let's ask, what is John saying to us? Because I think John is doing the exact same thing. I'm convinced that in 21st century America, we're even more convinced than the 1st century Laodiceans that we can take care of ourselves. We can find our security in ourselves. We can keep ourselves secure. And so we depend on ourselves. Our national borders are safe. We can make enough money. We have a large enough bank account and a good 401k. We're secure. And because of that, we really don't need God, and we can drift from God. And what John is doing with these horsemen is saying, really? Are you really as safe and secure as you'd like to think you are? First horseman. How safe are you in America? Are your national borders that secure? Do you remember 9/11? Remember the Boston Marathon bombings? Are we going to go to war with Iran? Last time you were at the airport, what was the security level threat? Are we really safe in this country? Second horseman. What about violence? Are you safe in your own town? Are there parts of your town that you wouldn't walk around in late at night? Do you need a burglar and a home security system for your house? And what about schools? Are you safe sending your kids to school? We live in a society that started to shoot up schools. Do you dare send your kids to school? Churches, there's danger. Are you really safe in your own community? Third horseman. What about economics? Are we really as prosperous as we like to think we are? Seemed like a few years ago, everybody was making money in the stock market. Now, not so sure. Is your job secure? Are you going to be able to afford all those medical bills and medical insurance? What about your retirement? How secure is the economy? And the fourth horseman, finally, if you can escape all the rest, what about death? How about your own mortality? The last funeral you went to, how did that make you feel? Again, what John is doing is intentionally pricking our sense of security. We fall into the temptation of thinking that we don't need to take God all that seriously, that we can build our life in safety and security on our own. And John is saying, really? He's presenting us with threats and judgments to remind us that true security is found only in God. Or to put this another way, this is great preaching that John is doing. This is just magnificent preaching. He's leading us away from all earthly supports that we might be open to God. One more point. Notice what John does with all this in chapter 7. In chapter 6, here in chapter 6, John is intentionally taking away all earthly security. If you think you can build your life securely on the things of this earth, you're mistaken. Chapter 6 ends with a question, who can stand? In the light of all these threats, who's safe, who's secure? And chapter 7 comes back and says, who can stand? Those who are sealed in Jesus Christ. Those who are sealed in Jesus Christ. Those who belong to Jesus can be safe and secure even in the midst of all this. And so what John is doing is in chapter 6, he's taking away all earthly security, and in chapter 7 giving it back in Jesus. Ultimate security, ultimate life, ultimate safety are found in Jesus. That's where we're to look. Well, that's the four horsemen. Let's leave it at that for this morning.